What if I told you that one of the most remarkable American success stories of our time began not in a gleaming boardroom or an Ivy League classroom, but in the desperate final hours of a collapsing nation? In April 1975, as North Vietnamese forces closed in on Saigon and the last American helicopters lifted off from embassy rooftops, a young man named Bin Ho made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his entire family for generations to come. He fled. He left behind everything he had ever known, every familiar street, every cherished memory, and stepped into the terrifying unknown of refugee life with nothing but his wife Hugh by his side and an unshakable belief that somewhere across the Pacific, a better life was waiting. Today, nearly 5 decades later, that same man lives in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in America, River Oaks, Houston. His family's multi-million-dollar empire spans real estate, investment banking, and media. His children and grandchildren want for nothing. His story has been broadcast to millions through the HBO Max docuseries House of Ho, drawing comparisons to the phenomenon of crazy rich Asians. But here is what makes Bin Ho's journey so extraordinary, so worth examining in meticulous detail. This is not a story about inheriting wealth or being born into privilege. This is a story about arriving in a foreign land, unable to speak the language, about pumping gas at an Exxon station for minimum wage, about watching your wife learn English from a stranger at a convenience store, and somehow, through decades of relentless determination, transforming that humble beginning into a financial dynasty. In this documentary, we will trace every step of that remarkable journey. We will travel back to the chaos of Saigon in 1975 and understand what it meant to become a refugee overnight. We will walk the quiet streets of Fredericksburg, Texas, where a young Vietnamese couple took their first uncertain steps in America. We will examine the strategic decisions, the calculated risks, and the unwavering family partnership that built a banking and real estate empire in Houston. And we will explore what it means to become the patriarch of a family now famous enough to have their own reality television series. This is the definitive story of Bin Ho, a gas station attendant who became a multimillionaire, a refugee who became an American institution. Stay until the very end, because the lessons embedded in this journey will fundamentally reshape how you think about success, sacrifice, and the enduring power of the American dream. To truly understand the magnitude of Bin Ho's journey, we must first travel back to the place where it all began. Saigon, 1949, a city caught in the crosswinds of history, still bearing the architectural elegance of French colonial rule while bracing for decades of conflict that would reshape not only Vietnam, but the entire geopolitical landscape of the 20th century. It was into this world of beauty and uncertainty that Bin Ho was born, the son of a nation that would soon be torn apart. The Vietnam of Bin's childhood was a country perpetually at war. First came the struggle against French colonialism, culminating in the decisive Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, and the subsequent Geneva Accords that partitioned the nation along the 17th parallel. The North fell under communist rule, the South aligned with the West, and Saigon, the pearl of Southeast Asia, became the capital of a new republic, desperately trying to establish itself while powerful forces gathered on every side. This was the backdrop against which a young Bin Ho learned the values that would define his life: hard work, perseverance, the unwavering belief that education could be a pathway to something better. As the 1960s dawned and American military advisors flooded into South Vietnam, Saigon transformed into something extraordinary. It was a city of contradictions. Buddhist temples stood alongside French cafes. Traditional Ao Dai dresses brushed past American military uniforms on crowded boulevards. The war was ever present, yet life continued with a kind of determined normalcy. Young people fell in love. Families gathered for meals. Dreams were dreamed. It was during these years that Bin met the woman who would become his partner in everything that followed. Huy. Their courtship unfolded against the soundtrack of a nation at war. But their commitment to each other was forged in something stronger than the chaos surrounding them. They were building a life together, unaware that forces far beyond their control would soon demand they abandon everything they had built. By the early 1970s, the writing was on the wall for anyone willing to read it. The Paris Peace Accords of January 1973 promised an end to American military involvement, but they delivered no lasting peace. American troops withdrew, American air support vanished, and the North Vietnamese army, patient and determined, began its final preparations. When the offensive came in early 1975, it came with devastating speed. Province after province fell. Refugees flooded south in desperate waves, and in Saigon, a city of 3 million souls watched in mounting horror as the impossible became inevitable. April 1975 will forever stand as one of the most dramatic months in modern history. The images are seared into collective memory. Desperate crowds scaling the walls of the American embassy, helicopters lifting off from rooftops as North Vietnamese tanks rolled through the streets below. In less than 24 hours, over 7,000 people were evacuated by helicopter alone, including 5,500 Vietnamese whose only crime was believing in a different future for their country. Binh and Huy Ho were among the approximately 130,000 Vietnamese who fled during this first wave of exodus. They left behind family. They left behind homes. They left behind the graves of ancestors and the streets where they had fallen in love. They carried with them only what they could hold, and a determination that somehow, somewhere, they would rebuild. The journey from Saigon to America was not a single leap, but a series of uncertain steps through a landscape of temporary shelters and bureaucratic processing. Many refugees first passed through reception camps in the Philippines or Guam before being transported to the United States. The American government, recognizing both its moral obligation and the political necessity of the moment, had designated 4 military installations to receive this human tide. Camp Pendleton in California, Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. These bases, built for training soldiers, now became temporary cities for the displaced. Congress acted with remarkable speed, passing the Indochina Migration and Refugee Assistance Act of 1975 and allocating $455 million for resettlement assistance. Private and religious organizations mobilized across the country, arranging sponsorships for families who had arrived with nothing. The policy was deliberate dispersal. Officials feared that concentrating refugees in single locations would create isolated enclaves and slow integration. So families were scattered across the American landscape, sent to towns and cities they had never heard of, sponsored by churches and civic groups whose members had never met a Vietnamese person in their lives. For Binh and Huy Ho, this process of dispersal led them to an unlikely destination. Fredericksburg, Texas, a small town in the heart of the Hill Country, founded by German immigrants in the 19th century, known for its peach orchards and its main street lined with beer gardens and bakeries. It was about as far from Saigon as one could imagine, not merely in miles, but in culture, in climate, in everything that makes a place feel like home. The young couple arrived speaking no English, possessing no American credentials, holding no currency that mattered in this new land. They had escaped a war. They had survived refugee camps. They had crossed an ocean. But their real journey was only beginning. The America that greeted Vietnamese refugees in 1975 was a nation still processing its own trauma from the war. Unemployment stood at 9%. The economy staggered under the weight of stagflation. Not everyone welcomed these newcomers with open arms. Yet President Gerald Ford insisted on honoring what he saw as a moral obligation to allies who had stood with America for years. He personally greeted refugee flights and cradled infants in his arms for the cameras. It was a gesture of welcome, a promise that this country could be a place of new beginnings. Whether that promise would prove true for Bin and Huy Ho remained to be seen. They had landed in America. Now they had to survive it. And survival, as they would soon discover, meant starting at the very bottom and climbing with nothing but their own two hands. Fredericksburg, Texas, population roughly 5,000 in the mid-1970s, a town where German was still spoken in some homes, where the streets bore names like Hauptstrasse and the bakeries sold strudel alongside American apple pie. It was here, in this improbable corner of the Texas Hill Country, that Bin and Huy Ho began their American life. Not with fanfare or celebration, but with the quiet desperation of two people who had lost everything and possessed nothing but each other and an unshakable refusal to surrender to circumstance. The language barrier was absolute. Neither Bin nor Huy spoke English when they arrived. Every interaction became an exercise in humiliation and determination. Ordering food, understanding directions, filling out paperwork. Tasks that native speakers accomplish without thought became monumental challenges requiring patience, creativity, and a willingness to endure the embarrassment of miscommunication. But refugees do not have the luxury of waiting until conditions improve. Bills must be paid. Food must be purchased. Life must continue, even when life feels impossible. So Bin Ho walked into an Exxon gas station and asked for work. He got it. Minimum wage, pumping gas, cleaning windshields, checking oil levels. It was honest labor, and it was humbling labor, and it was the foundation upon which everything else would eventually be built. Hu found her own position at a Circle K convenience store. The fluorescent lights, the endless stream of customers, the cash register with its unfamiliar currency. She worked her shifts, and she watched, and she listened. But her breakthrough came not from the job itself, but from an unexpected source of kindness. A woman who taught at Schreiner University, a small liberal arts college in nearby Kerrville, began teaching Hu English, word by word, phrase by phrase. The two women formed a bond that transcended the transactional nature of the lessons. When Bin and Huy later had their first daughter, they named her Judy, after the woman who had given Huy the gift of language. It was a gesture of profound gratitude, a permanent reminder that their American journey had been made possible by the generosity of strangers. The daily reality of those early years was grueling. Bin pumped gas during long shifts and came home exhausted. Huy worked the convenience store counter and studied English in whatever hours remained. Their combined income barely covered the basics of survival. There were no vacations, no luxuries, no margin for error. Every dollar was accounted for. Every expense was scrutinized. They lived the kind of careful, calculated existence that immigrants throughout history have known. The existence of people who understand that one misstep, one unexpected bill, one stroke of bad luck could send everything tumbling down. But within this constrained life, something remarkable was taking shape. A plan, a vision. A refusal to accept that pumping gas and working convenience store counters represented the ceiling of their potential. What Bin Ho did next defied every practical consideration. He decided to go back to school. Not for a certificate or a quick credential, but for a full university education. The audacity of this decision cannot be overstated. Here was a man working full-time at a gas station, supporting a growing family, still mastering the English language, and he committed himself to pursuing a bachelor's degree at Rutgers University. The workload was crushing. The sacrifice was immense. But Bin understood something fundamental about America that many native-born citizens take for granted. Education in this country is not merely about learning. It is about credentials. It is about access. It is about opening doors that remain permanently closed to those without the proper documentation of competence. A Vietnamese refugee with no degree would forever be limited to entry-level positions. a Vietnamese refugee with an American university diploma, could dream bigger. The years at Rutgers tested every ounce of Bin's discipline and determination. He attended classes. He studied late into the night. He continued working to support his family. And when the final grades were calculated, Bin Ho had not merely graduated. He had graduated magna cum laude, with high honors. A refugee who had arrived in America, unable to speak the language, had mastered its academic institutions and emerged among the top performers. But Bin was not finished. He continued his education at Washington State University, pursuing and eventually earning his doctorate in 1991. The gas station attendant had become Dr. Bin Ho. The transformation was complete, at least on paper. The real transformation, the building of an empire, was still to come. During these years of academic pursuit, the Ho family was also growing. Judy, named after Hu's English teacher, was followed by two sons, Washington and Reagan. The choice of names was deliberate and deeply symbolic. Bin and Hu wanted their sons to carry names that proclaimed their American identity, that declared their family's commitment to this new homeland. They chose the names of presidents, men who had led the nation that had given them refuge. It was a statement of belonging, of gratitude, of determination to be seen not as permanent outsiders, but as full participants in the American story. The tradition would continue into the next generation. When grandchildren arrived, they too would receive presidential names: Kennedy, Truman, McKinley, Roosevelt, Lincoln. The Ho family was planting its flag in American soil with every birth certificate they signed. By the end of the 1980s, Bin Ho had accomplished something extraordinary. He had arrived as a refugee with nothing. He had worked the most humble jobs available. He had put himself through university while supporting a family. He had earned advanced degrees from respected American institutions. The foundation was laid. The credentials were secured. The discipline had been proven. But credentials alone do not build empires. They open doors. Walking through those doors, seizing opportunities, taking calculated risks, building something that would last for generations, that would require an entirely different set of skills. As the 1990s approached, Bin Ho was ready to stop proving himself and start building. Houston, Texas, with its booming economy and its thriving Vietnamese community, was calling. And Bin Ho was about to answer with a vision that would transform his family's fortune forever. Houston, Texas, the 1990s, a city exploding with possibility. The energy capital of the world was diversifying, expanding, reaching upward with glass and steel towers that reflected a future limited only by imagination and ambition. The population was surging past 3 million. Neighborhoods were sprouting from former ranch land. Commercial developments were transforming the urban landscape. And for a man with advanced degrees, discipline forged through adversity, and an eye for opportunity, Houston represented something magnificent. It represented the chance to stop working for others and start building something of his own. Bin Ho looked at this booming metropolis and saw not just a city, but a canvas upon which he could paint his family's future. The decision to enter real estate was strategic and deliberate. Bin understood a fundamental truth about wealth in America. Salaries, no matter how generous, create comfort. Assets create dynasties. Real estate, with its combination of tangible value, leverage potential, and appreciation over time, offered the kind of wealth-building opportunity that could transform a single generation's success into multi-generational prosperity. He founded a Texas-based real estate development company with Huy as his partner, just as she had been his partner in everything since those desperate days of flight from Saigon. The company would focus on both residential and commercial properties, diversifying risk while maximizing exposure to Houston's remarkable growth trajectory. The early projects required everything Bin had learned about discipline, planning, and calculated risk. Residential subdivisions demanded careful attention to location, construction quality, and market timing. Commercial properties required understanding tenant needs, lease structures, and the complex dance between developers, investors, and financial institutions. Bin threw himself into mastering every aspect of the business. He was not content to be a passive investor collecting returns. He was a hands-on developer who understood that success in real estate comes from attention to detail, from being present on job sites, from building relationships with contractors and city officials and potential buyers. One of his notable projects was a residential subdivision of 400 homes, a development that demonstrated his ability to execute at scale and deliver quality housing to the Houston market. But real estate was only one pillar of the empire Bin was constructing. The second pillar would prove equally important: investment banking and financial services. Through Lu Investment Incorporated, Bin established himself as a principal in the world of high-level financial transactions. He served as president, director, and secretary of the firm, maintaining the kind of hands-on control that had characterized every successful venture in his life. The company operated from the foundation of trust and discretion that defines serious financial institutions, managing investments and providing services to clients who valued both competence and integrity. Banking and investment would eventually constitute an estimated 30% of the family's total wealth, providing steady income streams and diversification against the cyclical nature of real estate markets. Over the course of his career, Bin Ho would be associated with 17 different companies, a testament to his restless entrepreneurial energy and his ability to identify opportunities across multiple sectors. These entities included real estate ventures, investment vehicles, and banking operations that collectively formed a complex web of business interests centered in Texas, but reaching across markets and industries. Each company represented a calculated bet, a strategic positioning, an attempt to capture value where others saw only risk. Not every venture succeeded equally, but the overall trajectory was unmistakably upward. The refugee who had pumped gas at minimum wage was becoming a significant player in Houston's financial landscape. The family partnership that had sustained Bin and Huy through refugee camps and convenience store shifts now evolved into something more sophisticated, but no less fundamental. They were building together, making decisions together, sharing both the risks and the rewards of their increasingly complex business operations. Vietnamese cultural values placed enormous emphasis on family as the basic unit of economic and social organization. The Ho's embraced this tradition while adapting it to American business practices. Their children were raised to understand that the family's success was a collective achievement, requiring collective effort and loyalty. Judy pursued law, eventually becoming an attorney whose professional skills would complement the family's business interests. Washington developed his own entrepreneurial ventures, launching businesses that ranged from a lifestyle brand promoting Texas-made products to investments in technology startups and virtual reality entertainment. The geographic marker of the family's success became increasingly impressive. They moved to River Oaks, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in all of Houston. Developed in the 1920s as an elite residential enclave, River Oaks had long been home to the city's wealthiest and most influential families. Its winding streets shaded by ancient oak trees, its estates hidden behind manicured hedges, its proximity to the finest country clubs and private schools, all of these signaled arrival at the pinnacle of Houston society. To live in River Oaks was to have achieved something undeniable. Neighbors included United States senators and megachurch pastors, oil executives, and professional athletes. And now, among them, a Vietnamese refugee family whose patriarch had once pumped gas in Fredericksburg. The significance of this geographic ascent cannot be overstated. In less than 3 decades, Bin Ho had traveled from a gas station to one of the most prestigious addresses in Texas. He had moved from minimum wage to a net worth that various estimates place between $200 million and $350 million. He had transformed himself from a man with no credentials in this country to a doctorate-holding business owner whose companies spanned real estate, banking, and investment. and he had done it while maintaining the family unity and cultural identity that had sustained him through every challenge. The empire was built, the wealth was secured, the next generation was positioned to carry the legacy forward. But something unexpected was about to thrust the private Ho family into a very public spotlight, transforming them from Houston's success story into a national phenomenon watched by millions. In December 2020, as the world grappled with a global pandemic and Americans sought distraction from unprecedented uncertainty, a new docuseries premiered on HBO Max. It was called House of Ho, and it would transform a wealthy Houston family from private success story into public fascination. The premise was irresistible. A Vietnamese-American family living in opulent splendor, complete with River Oaks mansions and six-figure automobiles, navigating the tensions between traditional immigrant values and modern American ambitions. Comparisons to Crazy Rich Asians were immediate and inevitable. But there was a crucial difference that made the Ho family story fundamentally more compelling. The Hos were not old money. They were not born into privilege. They were refugees who had built everything from nothing, and now they were inviting cameras into their world to document what that journey had produced. The show premiered on December 10, 2020, with 7 episodes that introduced viewers to the complex dynamics of the Ho family. Bin appeared as the patriarch, the strict father whose traditional values sometimes clashed with his American-raised children. Huy was the matriarch, fiercely protective of her family while navigating her own complicated relationships with her daughter and daughter-in-law. Judy, the eldest child and a practicing attorney, was shown wrestling with her recent divorce and her desire for independence from family expectations. Washington, the heir apparent, struggled with his own demons while trying to find his place in a family business he had not built. Aunt Tina provided comic relief and chaos in equal measure. Cousin Sammy added another layer of family complexity. The cast was sprawling, the drama was real, and the production values were impeccable, with sweeping shots of Houston's skyline and intimate moments captured in the family's spectacular homes. The cultural significance of House of Ho extended far beyond entertainment. Houston is home to the third largest Vietnamese population in the United States. Yet Vietnamese American stories had rarely received mainstream media attention outside the context of war and refugee trauma. Here was something different. Here was a Vietnamese American family depicted not as victims or survivors, but as victors. Wealthy, successful, complicated, and unapologetically themselves. The show sparked conversations about representation, about the diversity within Asian American communities, about what it means to achieve the American dream and what that achievement costs. Critics debated whether the focus on extreme wealth distorted the typical Vietnamese American experience. Defenders argued that any representation was valuable, that seeing successful Asian Americans on screen mattered, regardless of how representative their circumstances might be. Season 2 arrived on August 25, 2022, expanding the cast and deepening the storylines. 10 episodes explored new terrain, including Judy's evolving relationship with Dr. Nathan Nguyen, whom she had begun dating in Season 1 and who had proposed in the finale. Washington's struggles with alcohol and his search for meaningful work received more sustained attention. New family members joined the ensemble, including younger cousins Bella and Kim, whose California perspectives offered contrast to the Houston-based older generation. The show delved into fertility challenges, career changes, and the ever-present tension between what parents want for their children and what those children want for themselves. Through it all, Bin remained the gravitational center, the man whose journey from Saigon to River Oaks made everything else possible. But what does Bin Ho himself represent when we step back and consider the full arc of his extraordinary life? He represents something that transcends any television show or net worth calculation. He represents proof that the American dream, for all its contradictions and limitations, remains accessible to those willing to sacrifice everything in its pursuit. Consider the magnitude of the transformation. In 1975, Bin Ho fled his homeland with nothing. He could not speak English. He possessed no American credentials. He had no network, no capital, no safety net of any kind. He arrived in a small Texas town and took a job pumping gas at an Exxon station. His wife worked at a Circle K convenience store and learned English from a kind stranger. They earned minimum wage and counted every dollar and dreamed dreams that must have seemed impossibly distant from their daily reality. And yet, 5 decades later, that same man lives in River Oaks among Houston's elite. His net worth is measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. His business interests span real estate development, investment banking, and multiple corporate entities. His children are educated professionals. His grandchildren bear the names of American presidents, a tradition that declares with every birth certificate that this family belongs here, that they have claimed this country and been claimed by it. His story has been broadcast to millions through a major streaming platform, making him a recognizable face and his family a subject of national conversation. The gas station attendant became the patriarch of a dynasty. The refugee became an institution. This is not a story about luck, though luck certainly played its role. This is a story about decisions. The decision to flee when staying meant possible persecution. The decision to take any job available and perform it with dignity. The decision to pursue education despite every obstacle of language and time and money. The decision to risk accumulated savings on business ventures that could have failed. The decision to build not just wealth, but a family culture that would sustain success across generations. Each decision compounded upon the last, creating momentum that eventually became unstoppable. Bin Ho did not stumble into prosperity. He engineered it through 5 decades of relentless, strategic, disciplined effort. Today, in his mid-70s, Bin Ho can look back on a journey that spans continents and encompasses experiences most people cannot imagine. War, displacement, refugee camps, minimum wage labor, academic achievement, business success, media fame. He has lived multiple lives within a single lifetime, each chapter more improbable than the last. And the legacy continues. Washington pursues his own ventures. Judy builds her career and her family. 7 grandchildren carry presidential names into a future their grandfather could not have conceived when he first set foot on American soil. The Ho family story is not finished. It is merely entering its next chapter. But the foundation, the origin, the source of everything that followed remains that single defining truth. One Vietnamese refugee arrived in Texas with nothing and built an empire. His name is Bin Ho, and his story is America at its most extraordinary. We began this documentary with a question. What does it take to transform absolute devastation into generational wealth? What does it take to arrive in a foreign country with nothing, not even the language, and build a multi-million-dollar empire that your grandchildren will inherit? The answer, as Bin Ho's story reveals, is not simple. It is not a single quality or a single decision. It is decades of relentless, unglamorous work. It is pumping gas at minimum wage while dreaming of something greater. It is learning English from strangers and pronouncing words wrong until you get them right. It is going back to school when you are already an adult with responsibilities. It is betting on yourself when no one else will. It is partnering with someone who believes in the same dream and never letting go. Bin and Huy Ho did all of this. They arrived in Fredericksburg, Texas in 1975 as refugees with nothing. They worked at a gas station and a convenience store. They raised 3 children while building businesses. They moved to Houston and systematically constructed an empire in real estate and banking. They named their sons after American presidents because they wanted their family to belong to this country, to claim it, to be claimed by it. And in 2020, they allowed cameras into their River Oaks home so the world could see what a Vietnamese refugee family looks like when they win. The criticisms of House of Ho, that it focuses on wealthy elites, that it does not represent all Vietnamese Americans, are valid. But they miss the deeper point. Bin Ho is not claiming to represent everyone. He is representing one possibility, one path, one answer to the question that every immigrant asks when they arrive on foreign soil. Can I make it here? For Bin and Huy Ho, the answer was yes. A resounding multi-million-dollar River Oaks Mansion HBO Max documentary, yes. And that answer matters. It matters to the young Vietnamese American watching the show and wondering if someone who looks like them can succeed in this country. It matters to the refugee family arriving today, uncertain about their future. It matters to anyone who has ever been counted out. What did you think of Bin Ho's story? Does his journey inspire you or challenge you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this documentary valuable, please subscribe for more stories about the people who defied the odds and built something extraordinary from nothing. Because stories like this one remind us that the American dream, for all its flaws and contradictions, is still possible. Bin Ho is living proof.